What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is... I'm trying a different countdown than what I normally think of. Besides my usual... Since, when you think about it, most of my previous countdowns were about video games, Pokemon, Fire Emblem, or anime. You would think that I'm a one-trick pony with that, but I do a lot of other things. And especially when it comes to countdowns, as I've had basically countdowns about subjects that weren't about the things I mentioned. And one of those are voice actors. As considering the amount of media I consume, I tend to notice there are a lot of voice actors. There are a lot of similar voice actors are in a lot of the similar... there are at least in the many different media that I consume. So, basically, I might as well start this one off with talking about my favorite voice roles from specific voice actors. And starting off first, I'm counting down my favorite roles from Cherami Leigh, which really says a lot when you think about it. But that being said, in all fairness, the rules are one per franchise, and in all fairness, yeah, let's just be real. Let's just be real. If it's a role that Cherami Leigh voiced, I'm going to mention her at least in this. I'm going to mention her at least in this countdown. And trust me, I have not watched every anime or show that Cherami Leigh has been in, or played every video game that she's had a hand in voicing a character from. But in all fairness, let's just be real. I'm just doing it just to be extra. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off first at number 10, we have Cherami Nekozawa from Ouran High School Host Club. Alright, for those that remember my list of my top 10 favorite anime, I basically watched it, and I basically first watched it after borrowing it from a local library nearby, specifically the South Plainfield Public Library. As I was browsing the shelves, and I noticed that they had anime DVDs, which piqued my interest. So, as such, I borrowed Ouran High School Host Club and when I got home, I basically ended up watching it. And for once, I have to say, I enjoyed it so much. Granted, that being said, I was basically surprised when I realized that Cherami Leigh actually voiced a one-off character from a single episode, that being Cherami Nekozawa, the younger sister of the character Nekozawa from Ouran High School Host Club, who has an obsession with cats. And basically, in all fairness, I basically was not only shocked, but I was actually surprised, as more often than not, for those that don't know, the episode where Cherami Nekozawa shows up is when she shows up at the host club, at the area where the host club is, looking for her brother, and, well, she shows a very shocking knowledge of, well, reverse harems and debaucherous situations. Something you wouldn't expect an elementary school age girl to know. And when I first saw that, I basically did a full-on double take because I was not expecting that. And keep in mind, she also thinks of... This is also a kid who thinks of Tamaki Suo as initially considered her Tamaki Suo her brother because he had blonde hair. And even I was... So yeah, it's basically hilarious. Granted, the fact that I remember her even now is because of the fact that it is because of Masay Anella, as there is a little bit of a scene from one of her Stardew Valley streams that she did, where she mentioned about the time where she and Chugga Conroy watched this episode of Ouran High School Host Club, and he basically asked her what a reverse harem is. And honestly, not only do I find it funny, which, again, the fact that Chugga Conroy was one of the few who was full-on taken aback by this, but every time it allowed me to go back to the episode, go back to the scene that this entire in this anime and watch it. And it's one of those times that, and basically this scene has been one of those scenes that I watch just to get a laugh out of, because it is just so out of pocket for this elementary school aged, like 7 or 8 year old little girl to know what a reverse harem is. Oh my god. So yeah. I'm starting it off with a one episode character. Yeah, it says a lot. Moving on next at number 9, we have Nisak's Daemon from Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt. Yeah. Moving on from an anime that I discovered after borrowing it from a local library to an anime that I discovered like 2 years ago. Yeah, it's been that long, and not only do I need to get back to it, but considering how season 2 was just released, I gotta watch that as well. But either way, Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt is an interesting anime, and one of the few anime that I consider my guilty pleasure, because basically the main protagonists are just, while they're angels, they're also kind of the angelic personifications of lust and gluttony, respectively. And trust me, while Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt has some hilarious episodes, granted the whole Stocking trying to lose weight episode is basically one of them, it introduced a lot of interesting characters, one of which being the Anarchy Sisters, Scanty and Nisak, who are basically the antithesis, if you will, of Panty and Stocking themselves. And trust me, while out of the episodes I've seen, only like 2 or 3 of them have these 2 sisters in it, the fact that they are basically the rivals of Panty and Stocking are just kind of hilarious, as they're more or less upstanding individuals, upstanding rule-abiding individuals, to the point where they more or less seem like full-on know-it-alls. And even with that, the fact that knee socks is basically the antithesis of stocking really has its own thing. Again, never mind the fact that stocking is voiced by Monica Rial. Oh boy, there's a good chance that'll happen in the future. Anyway, I digress. Yeah. The fact that I need to get back to watching the remainder of the first season, as well as the second season, really says a lot. Also, the fact that Ryan Bartley replaced Cherami Leigh as knee socks is kind of disappointing, but Ryan Bartley also voices both Rom from ReZero and Setsuna from Fire Emblem Fates, so again, not a big issue. Moving on next at number 8, we have Roddy Tops from the Shantae franchise. Okay. Moving on next. Speaking of a lot of different things, the only Shantae game that I played through is the first Shantae title for the Game Boy Color. And even I haven't gotten to that point. But still, in all fairness, the Shantae franchise is an interesting series that I'm willing to play through every entry at least once. And in all fairness, it has some interesting characters. One such character being the zombie girl Roddy Tops, who, well, which, when you consider, that I kinda consider Roddy Tops attractive, seriously, between her, Squiggly from Skullgirls, and Shenko from Darkstalkers, I might have a type. But even with that, Roddy Tops is just completely one of my favorites due to how sassy she is. I mean, heck, in the very first Shantae game, when you first meet her at the zombie caravan, you see her, she's just sassily swinging her hips with her hands on her hips. Just proves how entirely sassy she is. And that being said, I have not gotten to the point where you race her in order to get into the cackle mound. Because again, I kind of got a little stymied. That's pretty much saying a lot. But even with that, it really does say a lot, as even if you do lose, instead of just eating Shantae's brain, she gives Shantae, and in fact you, another chance to basically try to beat her in a race. And even with that, this allows Roddy Top to be a continuous presence in many of the other games. And heck, even though she is seemingly an annoyance to Shantae herself, in fairness, it's kind of a bit of an effort that Shantae kind of enjoys her presence. Especially when you consider that there is a scene where you visit the underworld and you come across a girl who is who strangely resembles Roddy Tops, who mentions that there's a girl that she wants to be there's someone she wants to be friends with, but she ends up fine, but her attempts always end up causing her to get mad at her. And Shantae is understandable, which really puts a nice little emphasis on Roddy Top's efforts to really want to be friends with Shantae. And it's saying a lot once you realize that when faced with Nega Shantae, Sky and Bolo are basically the ones to try and snap her out of it. And it's not the only one, as the Pajama Party DLC basically has Roddy Tops in Shantae's pillowcase for some weird reason, because she wanted to come with her on her adventure. And of course, in the DLC where Shantae, Risky Boots, Sky, and Roddy Tops are all basically captured by a group of people who basically believe that they're a stand-in for their princess, who just so happened to have gone out shopping. Yeah. She basically is enjoying every second of the outfit that they put her in. And the less said about I'm a good lady, or I'm a good vibes, yeah, from I'm not sure if it's I'm a good lady. Yeah, I think it's I'm a good lady. Less said about I'm a good lady from Shantae and the Seven Sirens being obviously Roddy Tops, the better. Seriously, just play Shantae and the Seven Sirens. You'll know exactly what I mean. Yeah, I think I have a type with zombies. With zombie girls. Moving on next at number 7, we have Patty Thompson from Soul Eater. Yeah. Yet another running gag about an anime that I still have a lot to finish watching. And this time it's Soul Eater. Yeah. I first discovered Soul Eater way back in I think 2010, 2011, one of those times. Maybe 2009 or 2008, I don't know. But I discovered Soul Eater. And it's been one of my favorite anime that I've ever seen. To the point that also several years later, I decided to revisit it. And I understand how much I love this anime. And not just because of the fact that many of the characters are still kind of iconic. I mean, heck, when it comes down to it, Maka and Death the Kid are some of the best characters voiced by Laura Bailey and Todd Haberkorn. And in all fairness, the first time I discovered, it's fair to say that Soul Eater Evans was the very first time I discovered and I learned about Micah Solusad, who surprisingly enough voices all Kristen Fire Emblem Engage, who is the antithesis of Soul himself. But that being said, going back to it, two of the most surprising individuals are the Thompson sisters, Liz and Patty, who, again, I have not seen Soul Eater or not, but the fact that they were both from Brooklyn, New York is, well, kind of surprising, as, again, I am from New Jersey, which is south of New York, so while I've never exactly, for the most part, been to Brooklyn, I kind of know about it. Well, from reading different things. But in all fairness, I kind of get the vibe that they were going for. But what's even more noticeable is that Patty, considering how this is about Cherami Leigh voice roles, I gotta talk about Patty. And honestly, she's one of my favorites solely because of the fact that she's basically one of those head-empty, ditzy characters that shows a significant amount of intelligence, and that shows a surprising amount of intelligence. And keep in mind, I love these sorts of characters that have that sort of that show this from time to time. And think the likes of Patrick Star from SpongeBob SquarePants. Specifically like early season SpongeBob, or even a character like Brittany S. Pierce from Glee. Basically, Patty just seems like this 24/7, as she's goofy, excitable, and she is just an adorable treat. But even with that, she shows a significant amount of creativity. I mean, who else would turn their test paper into a giraffe and more or less wrestle it? I mean, granted, I wouldn't, but in fairness, that's kind of what makes these characters so enjoyable. Also, now I want to watch Soul Eater or not. Should I watch Soul Eater or not? Please let me know if I should watch it in the comments, because I really would like to watch that anime. I really want to give it a chance, but I'm not sure how it seems, or if it's a good anime to watch. Just need the advice here. Moving on, next at number 6, we have Chloe Cerise from Pokemon Journeys the series. Now, hear me out. Granted, I've been a lifelong Pokemon fan ever since Red and Blue first came out. And especially ever since I got Pokemon Red when I was like 8 or 9. So, in fact, as I've mentioned so many times before, Pokemon and Fire Emblem are my autistic special interests. That being said, there is a sort of consensus within the Pokemon fan community, within the Pokemon community, that everyone tends to agree on. Ash should at least make a return in Pokemon Horizons. Starters should not every starter should not stand up in their final evolutions. And both the Black and White and Journeys anime are the worst anime ever. Granted, while I'm not saying anything to the Black and White, and while I can't say much to the Black and White anime, even though, let's be real, I'm always going to I'm always going to go to bat with the black and white anime being one of my favorites due to the Generation 5 games being one of my favorite games in the franchise due to being from the real life Unova. But when it comes to Journeys, I really like this anime as basically it more or less has Ash going around to many different regions, including the regions that he's visited in past seasons. And even with that, I additionally like the other main characters, Go and Chloe. And while my thoughts on Go are just are basically just their own thoughts. Chloe, on the other hand, I kind of like, as well, when we first meet her, she's basically shown as Go's childhood friend and the daughter of Professor Cerise. And as such, more or less, seems like she doesn't care too much for Pokemon. But then, later on in the series, you discover that why she doesn't care too much for Pokemon are because many of the other students in her class basically think that just because her father is the professor it means that she might want to become a Pokemon researcher as well. And honestly, in all fairness, I get it. Being compared to your parents is really saying a lot. And saying a lot as, again, I share my first name with my father, so it's very hard to figure out which one they're talking about, whether him or myself. So, yeah, I kind of get it. And most of the things I do are trying to blaze my own path, separate from my father, so I'm not compared to him. That being said, but that's neither here nor there. As when it comes down to it, mostly I like the fact that throughout the series, Chloe ends up just trying to find her own path. Granted, I haven't watched all of Pokemon Journeys, and now it's made even harder since Netflix decided to remove it. Why? Either way, more often than not, it's one of those few moments that the fact that Chloe is basically seeing Chloe trying to find her own path is kind of interesting. And I'm always engrossed in it. Especially when she got Eevee. As she's trying to help Eevee, learn how to figure out which Pokemon and which evolution it wants to evolve into is an interesting endeavor, to say the least. It says a lot once you realize that one of the evolutions is owned by Erica. Trust me, we'll get to that episode soon enough. Alright. But yeah. I kind of like Chloe. Just don't hate me on this. Moving on next at number 5, we have Red Blood Cell. Yeah, this is one of I guess I'd say the last, well, not the last anime character on this list, as there's one more later on. But in all fairness, I actually like Cells at Work. as basically I first learned about Cells at Work from a video by the YouTube channel Anime America. And I was intrigued to see it. Specifically because, well, Robin of Anime America, as in Robin Barry Cotter of Anime America, just so happened to mention that the platelets are adorable. And after watching the first season of Cells at Work, I have to agree, the platelets are adorable. But even with that, the second most adorable character just so happens to be Red Blood Cell, who is basically kind of a newbie Red Blood Cell, but just tasked with delivering courier jobs all throughout the body. And basically, let's just be real. She is one of the few characters that, honestly, I have to say, it just hits me hard. Because, keep in mind, before starting this channel, I had 2 jobs. One at Goodwill, the other at Dollar Tree. And even though I was a hard worker, I dealt with some growing pains. Granted, I was let go of my job at Goodwill because of a certain event back in 2020. But in terms of Dollar Tree, I was let go from it just after 5 years of working there. And granted, before that, and I didn't get a lot of work hours, so the work hours were were slowly being trimmed, so yeah. So even with that, even when I was watching Cells at Work and I saw Red Blood Cell just being sort of a kind of a fresh-eyed newbie at her job, and basically coming across many of these different viruses that just so happened to take over that human body that day. I mean, it honestly reminded me of a lot of my own work experience. And it's fair to say I really felt for her in these sorts of situations. Yeah, now that space has kind of been filled by Larry from from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. But in all fairness, Red Blood Cell is kind of like the before aspect of me as an autistic employee, or in my autistic work history. She represents me from when I first started my job at Goodwill, while Larry from Scarlet and Violet is kind of like the me now. To the point that I'm starting to go bald. Oh boy. Right. Moving on next at number 4, we have Makoto Nijima from Persona 5. Yeah. Granted, like I said before, I kind of have an interesting connection with the Persona franchise, as basically my first association with it was in watching Persona 4 the animation on demand, and I basically enjoyed it. And now I currently am watching Let's Plays of Persona 4 and an entire Persona 5 Let's Play from the YouTuber Shirako. And, well, Persona 4 was not by Shirako, it was by another one named Kaikiski7. But yeah, in all fairness, I'm currently watching a Let's Play of Persona 5 from the YouTuber Shirako, and even with that, I actually like a lot of characters from the game thus far. Granted, and of course one of them just so happens to be Makoto, who is, well, she's basically considered the, I guess, the A-type sort of character, like the standard overachiever, who basically holds herself to a higher standard due to being class president. Kind of like how Mitsuru Kirijo was in Persona 3. And in all fairness, yeah, I see a lot of myself in Makoto as, again, going through middle school and high school, I was a bit of a nerd, but I was also a bit of an overachiever, as I got a lot of good grades. I mean, mostly A's and B's, but a C or two. But in all fairness, sometimes some C's, but mostly A's and B's. But even with that, yeah, I kind of... It's kind of weird how I see... This is the second character I saw myself in, which really says a lot about me. And while she's not one of my favorite Persona 5 characters, that has the distinction of best Persona 5 girl just so happens to go to Haru Okamura as well as I like the character of Futaba Sakura due to also showing some signs of being on the autism spectrum, like myself. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of myself in other characters. It's kind of interesting seeing Makoto just come into her own. I mean, when she the first time before she joins your group, she basically rushes headlong and forces someone to basically take them to the loan shark Kaneshiro, so she could basically get him to stop, well, stealing money from the other students. And yeah, this leads into one of the weirdest palaces in the game. Also, yeah. Plus, her actually coming into her own and full on removing her mask and getting her persona for the first time is one of the most epic moments I've ever seen. Which really does say a lot. Also, I have to mention the fact that Jalen K. Cassell voices Kaneshiro, and this is after the fact that I originally heard his voice as Chocolata from not Chocolata, Okuyasu from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable. Is kind of a weird whiplash. Seriously. A Joe bro like Okuyasu turning into a a loan shark like Kaneshiro is just wild. Moving on next at number 3, we have Lucy Heartfilia from Fairy Tail. This is the last anime character on this list, but in all fairness, I always save the best one of these. She's one of the best anime characters voiced by Cherami Leigh that I know of. And I initially discovered Fairy Tail from watching it on demand. And then it was like several years before, like 2018. Oh, not 20, like, I don't remember, like 2010, 2011, one of those times. But then, like around 2017, 2018, I decided to watch Fairy Tail from the beginning. And thankfully, there were full episodes of the English dub of Fairy Tail on YouTube, and I enjoyed it. And Lucy's a solid main character, as while she was essentially born into a wealthy family, she is one of the few characters who can basically hold her own without her parents' money. And the fact that she wants to become a member of a magic guild is really saying a lot. And her joining Fairy Tail is one of the best things that ever happened. Granted, she's kind of a sort of a dare I say, a straight man to the other members of Team Natsu. Especially when you consider how Erza is an imposing warrior. Gray has his, habit of stripping down to his boxer shorts at a moment's notice, and Natsu is Natsu. But in all fairness, that's just what makes her kind of interesting, to say the least. And even with that, and seeing her dynamic with Team Natsu, and especially Natsu himself, is kind of one of the best dynamics I've ever seen. And it goes beyond Team Natsu, as basically she has an interesting dynamic with the other characters in the Fairy Tail Guild, as she has a solid friendship with the likes of characters like Mira Jane, Kana and Levi. She has a sort of a great minds think alike, sort of dynamic with Happy, to the point that they mostly serve as straight men towards Natsu's antics. She had a bit of a one-sided rivalry with Juvia due to, her thinking that she was her rival for Gray's affection, even though that wasn't the case. And she has a sisterly bond with Wendy, which, honestly, the fact that I've seen all of these episodes and kept watching them really proves to how enjoyable Lucy is as a character. And the fact that I am almost this close to the Edelas arc, I can't wait. And especially when you consider that it introduces the alternate version of her named Lucy Ashley, who is, kind of the more rough and tumble version of Lucy herself. So yeah. Moving on next at number 2, we have May from Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. Yeah. When it comes down to the Fire Emblem franchise, yeah, I kind of have it kind of makes, considering how certain characters tend to get voiced from different games, tend to get voiced by the same character, and by the same voice actor, it's kind of hard to discover my favorites. I mean, just to mention, for example, Ben Diskin, the voice actors of Ben Diskin and Matt Mercer have some of my favorite characters that they voiced. And it's very hard to figure out which Fire Emblem character are my favorite. As in terms of Ben Diskin, it's actually between the likes of Caspar, Saizo, and Jacob. Whereas with Matt Mercer, it's obviously depending on which flavor of Broken Lord I want to choose, either Chrom or Ryoma. But that being said, when it comes to Cherami Leigh, it's kind of a no-brainer, as we only hear Cherami Leigh voicing Gwendolyn, not in Binding Blade, but in Heroes, so yeah. And of course, I wanted to choose Rhea as one of my favorite, in one of her voice roles in Three Houses, but playing the game 10 times kinda soured my opinion on her. Especially since 2 of those times were playing Crimson Flower. And yeah. Anyway, and so I just have to mention that just leaves one character, and with that I have to say May is definitely Bae. And keep in mind, Echoes was, for all pretenses, the 5th Fire Emblem game I've ever played. And honestly, May's been one of the best units I've had. Especially on Celica's path. Considering how she has to compete with the likes of Saber and Leon. But in all fairness, even while May's basically just zapping fools with her lightning magic, she's still an amazing unit and an amazing character just by how spunky and sassy she is. And that's saying a lot, considering that she was basically raised on the same island at the same priory as Celica. So she's basically one of her servants. She's basically also seen as her friend, and sees herself as her friend. And to the point that she's able, in her supports with Celica, she's able to confide a lot of a lot of her secrets with her, which really leads to a lot of perfect aspects of character, especially in one of her supports where she basically asks Celica if she really seems like a woman, even though she does, because she feels like she's not really as feminine as her. With Celica just telling her that she doesn't have to change anything, that she's perfect, and that she's perfect just the way she is. Really says a lot. And then there's her sort of constant butting heads with Bowie, which really does say a lot. And it's one of the more enjoyable rapports in the game. Which even does say a lot, since there is basically something, it's obvious there's something between the two of them. That being said, let's be real. I've mentioned this in my least favorite Fire Emblem Heroes Arts countdown, that I do not like the original art for base May, because, and while it's not because of the fact that the original artist was charged with some very heinous stuff, it was discovered to have done some very heinous stuff, but it didn't look like the May that I knew of. So when I eventually saw her new base art, I was fairly impressed, and I really liked it because it captured May for who she was in Echoes, and not distilled it down to the way her original base art was. And it's not coincidental that that after that countdown, I ended up pulling base May with the new base art. So, yeah. Kind of, had to toot my own horn. And finally, at number 1, we have Sonia from Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to the number 1 encounter, my number 1 favorite of Cherami Leigh's voice roles, it obviously has to come from a character from a game that I have yet to play. And that's not for nothing, because I have played a lot of Zelda titles. And especially when it comes down to it, I've played a bit of the precursor of Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. Again, watch my top 10 favorite Nintendo Switch games list to find out where I stand on that. Countdown on video to find out where I stand on that. But, yeah. I really love his character so much. And the fact that Sonia, however, even though I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom yet, the fact that Sonia was introduced as the original Queen of Hyrule, and I guess I'd say the ancestor of Zelda herself, yeah, it's really saying a lot. And she has a poised and almost regal demeanor to her, but she's also shown as kind, and she's also shown as kind and caring. Granted, the fact that she ends up dying in the game, spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't played Tears of the Kingdom, which granted that includes me, is kind of tragic to say the least. But from most I've seen of her, she is just one of the few characters I really love seeing. And I wish there was more that we could see of that. Of her in that one. Granted, also, she does play a role in Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, but yeah, like the other two Hyrule Warriors games, I have not played those games. I have not played that franchise series either. But granted, we also have to say I haven't played Fire Emblem Warriors or Three Hopes, so yeah. Here's to hoping I play any of those in the near future. So yeah. That being said, that definitely in this case, Sonya is my favorite Cherami Leigh voice role. Being at number 1. Alright. And that being said, that's my entire countdown, folks. Like, comment, subscribe, and of course join my Patreon at patreon.com/theautisticscyther. You can either, if you have the money to, you can pay to join one of my tiers, or you can join a free tier. Again, choice is yours. Just don't destroy your financial standings or feel pressure to do so. And with that being said, I'll see you guys next time. As well, it's about that time we headed, with Sonya being my number 1 entry, it's about that time we take a look at the Zelda franchise proper. In terms of actual weapons in the franchise. See you then.